I I guess we can get started. I haven't seen the live button come on my machine, but I guess it's on.
It is.
So I'd like to call the meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, March 30th, and this is a meeting of the Senate Agricultural Committee, and we're going to be taking testimony and discussing S10, the school breakfast and lunch program that we have proposed. And I want to welcome our witnesses this morning to the proceedings. And I guess we will get started with the committee introducing themselves in case everybody doesn't know us. I'm Bobby Starr and I chair the committee.
Chris Pearson, Senator from Chittenden County.
Hi, I'm Anthony Polina, Senator from Washington County.
Brian Collmore from the Rutland District.
And I'm Corey Parent. I represent Franklin County and Alberg.
Yes, so again, good morning to all. And we our S100 bill is on the Senate calendar, waiting for some changes that hopefully we will be able to come up with for later in the week. It certainly deals with a subject matter that we're all familiar with and have worked on for some of us longer than others, but the Universal Meals Program has been around for some time, and we have somewhere between 70 and 80 different school districts around the state that utilize this program. And S100 would make it possible for the other school districts to take part in universal meals. I think Rosie is on, and we had her first on our list of witnesses to talk about the changes that the Ed Department put forth last week, maybe it was the tail end of the week before, but I think we added those changes into the bill. And Rosie, could you tell us, and we have received documents from the agency in regards to the child nutrition program, which shows the different schools and where they are and what they have reported and how they qualify. Is there any more, Rosie, that you would want to add to the discussion?
So for the record, Rosie Kruger, I'm the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. And I actually didn't prepare any testimony for you today because I wasn't sure what specific aspect of the bill you wanted to talk about, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got. I think the amendment that had been introduced, I believe, either as a committee amendment or that Senator Pearson was going to introduce, included the language that AOE had requested in terms of allowing us to collect the data that we felt that we needed to collect. And so we were very happy with that language. And I don't think we need to discuss that further unless you've got any concerns about that. But assuming that that makes its way, I don't think it's actually been formally adopted yet, but assuming that gets presented and adopted, then I don't think we need to spend more time discussing that.
Yeah, yes, we did vote that, and it hasn't been presented yet because the bill's been held up for further information. One question, I guess, Rosie, I'd have is how much emphasis is placed on school districts to receive the income forms from parents, and is that you know, how hard is that pushed by the AOE to get that information from parents, or is that left up to the school districts?
So I think you're talking about the household income forms that schools use when they don't collect a free and reduced meal application.
Yes, that helps, you know, move the universal meals program forward, certainly.
So we don't put any particular emphasis. That's actually not a child nutrition program effort. So that's a form that schools use when they want to collect household income information, but they're not getting that information on an individual student level from the school meals program because they've gone to a universal meals option. So that information actually can't be collected using child nutrition funds. So my team doesn't really have a lot to do with that. The agency provides a template household income form that schools may use if they want to. And we have a staff person who works on the title programs who can answer questions for folks about that. But we don't do any particular training on using that form. And it's really up to schools because that's a non-child nutrition purpose that they would be collecting that information. So using the new language in the bill, the agency would have some more authority to kind of push that and require that more, and to kind of standardize that practice a little more across all schools. So right now, really not a lot of effort statewide, not a lot of uniformity in terms of how much effort different schools are putting into that. But with the language in the bill, I think that would empower the agency to put a little bit more work into that.
Yeah. Are there any questions from committee members on that particular question? If not, I'd like to move on to is it Sean? And Sean, and hear from you in regards to your experience dealing with universal meals, and maybe you could fill us in on some things that we haven't heard yet.
Thanks, Chairman Starr, and thank you, Senators, for inviting us to come and share our experiences and perspectives with you. I think my perspective may be a little unique in that I had the opportunity to be the principal at CVU for 8 years, and now having been the superintendent in Winooski for 8 years. Very different communities in many ways. I think most pertinent to this conversation in terms of the wealth levels across those communities, and that CVU has a number of towns that are some of our highest wealth communities, and Winooski is one of our lower wealth communities. So I bring both of those to this conversation. From the perspective of Winooski School District, we feel that we have benefited greatly by being a part of the CEP, the Community Eligibility Provision, which we started in the 2014-15 school year with incredible support from our partners at Hunger Free Vermont. Faye, Honora, and their team were instrumental in helping us navigate everything, and we were one of the first school districts to get on board with this. So the benefits as we've seen them and why we pursued this opportunity was really around our broader strategy of improving readiness to learn. And so what we know is that students who have stronger physical, nutritional, and emotional states are starting in a place where they can receive and engage with learning in a much better place than if they are not in a place where they have been fed, where they're feeling good, both physically and emotionally. So some of the concrete benefits that we've seen are starting, we know that every student starts the day with a nutritional meal. And K-8, they come in and they have breakfast in the classroom. It's kind of a familial around the kitchen table experience. It gives our our teachers, our staff, a chance to check in with kids, to look them in the eyes, see what's going on, and also to set the tone for learning for the rest of the day. Some of the other things that have positives that come out of that is it gives us a way to really teach and implement recycling and composting that have come into play, obviously, through the law. And it's not just breakfast, it's lunch, it's snacks during after school programming that we can provide, and supper, it's summer meals. And so all of this we have seen over the past 6 years, 7 years or so, is we've seen a decrease in visits to the health office. We've seen improved attendance. We've seen a lot of wonderful comments from family about reduced stress in their family about money related to food needs, and having to prep meals for multiple kids in the morning to come to school. And that's part of the families who are operating in an environment of poverty that contributes to that toxic stress. So we've removed one of those big components, which allows families then to focus on other challenges. So the universal meals has been a really important component for us of a multifaceted food security strategy that includes not only the CEP, but we work on the backpack program. We do fresh fruits and vegetables every day. We work with the Vermont Food Bank and do Veggie Van Go, so that families can come and pick up fresh fruits and vegetables every other week. And this, combined with other pieces like our school-based health center, dental services, social workers, mental health services, mindfulness programs, behavioral supports, academic supports, that's all part of an even broader approach to improving the overall readiness to learn, which may sound familiar to you in that it kind of speaks to the H106 bill around community schools. So I would also urge you to think about this as a prong in the most multifaceted approach to improving students' readiness to learn. It's not just meals. Meals is an important component to that, but there are a lot of other pieces. And I think that we all need to think about that in a really broad, strategic way and tying those together. So, I mean, as you know, BSA and we understand the importance of good nutrition. We acknowledge that it's really important, and we want to see food security continue to be moved forward for all students across Vermont. As you probably also know, we have questions about the funding. And so one of the current concerns that we have is we know that the estimated costs of providing this would cost the state somewhere from $24 to $40 million, add 2.7 to 4.4 cents to every school district in Vermont. And that concerns us. And I know there are different avenues that your committee and the Senate are looking at to come up with some creative ways of funding this. I guess I just would caution you to think about what are the broader priorities of education, from your committee's perspective, along with the ed committees and the broader Senate and House, so that they can be done in a very coherent way moving forward. None of us want to have, obviously, what people often call unfunded mandates. We don't want to end up with these unintended long-term liabilities like we have with the pension issue going on right now. So we want to really be thoughtful about that. One of the things that I would note is one of the real examples of a cost implication. I've talked to Amy Rex, my neighbor over in Milton, and she estimates that implementing this would cost her district $750,000 straight up front, with the challenges that they've had with slim budget votes. I would worry about them and other districts who wouldn't pass votes. And then in order to fund this, because they would have to, in the current language of the bill, they would have to then start reducing other programs. So that would certainly be a challenge at the local level. The other piece I wonder about is if we're talking about shifting the burden to the ed fund. There's already tremendous pressure on the ed fund. I worry about the polarity that can cause in communities between school districts and taxpayers, which already exists to some extent. But by keep kind of piling on the ed fund, we add that, and we can create a further polarization. And then kind of lastly, you know, if we're thinking about adding $25 to $40 million to education to fund universal meals, I would love to see a little more of what the specific data is that demonstrates the specific need. Because we have CEP, because we have other food security efforts that are going on, I'm just not familiar with specific Vermont data about groups of students that are not being served right now. And so I would love to see a little more targeted approach to getting some of that data and having it evaluated. And then looking at what are our broader educational priorities as a state. And then within that, how does universal meals fit into that?
Yeah.
So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess a question I have for you, Sean, is seeing you've done this and you're doing it, how much did it raise your taxes in Winooski, your budget at the Winooski school? Or how did that fare out in Winooski by having a universal meals program put in place?
So through the community eligibility provision, which is federally funded, it costs us very little. We contract our food services with the Abbey Group. And so we pay them a modest administrative fee that's based on the number of meals that are served. So really it's more fixed and operating costs. You know, we don't charge them any kind of rent to use the kitchen. You know, we certainly have staff who help out. I wouldn't say that we've necessarily quantified those costs. So I'd say that the cost to the community has been pretty minimal and far outweighs the benefits, far outweigh the cost with the way that we have done it. Now we, you know, by having well over 40% of our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, we meet that CEP threshold. There are obviously many districts who do not. So the cost of running a program like this, as I mentioned before, would be going straight to the locals.
Years ago, in my hometown, we did universal meals, and it cost us, you know, it was just part of our school budget, and it blended in with our budget, and of course we got state aid and all that. And I mean, it wasn't enough, so it even made a difference at town meeting, and I'm the moderator, so, and have been over the years, so I know the debate that goes on. There would be more debate over buying a riding tractor lawnmower to mow the grass, and that costs a few $1,000s, and the extra cost that the meals program costs the school. And so I just wonder about this debate, if you could add the cost of these meals in with the cost of phys ed and all your other expenses that a school district has, how big the debate would actually be. And, you know, this year, I believe school budgets in the state, I think we've heard testimony that there was only two that actually got voted down. And so maybe the language in the bill needs to be adjusted definitely so that schools could use this as operating, like they do their other operating funds. You mentioned, like Milton, how it would cost them a lot of money. Is that figuring in the state aid cost and the cost sharing and all that into that overall bill? Their school budget would go up by $750,000, I think you mentioned. Could you elaborate any on that issue?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not fully aware of how they got to that number. I just know that VSA got a reaction from some districts, and I think it speaks to your description of your local town and how it might play out. I think it would play out differently in different communities. So it depends on how the local district is funding meals right now, if they are. And then if they were to shift from that to something greater like universal meals, is there an impact? For example, not just Milton, but Montpelier said, I think 475,000 it would add. Champlain Valley, it was $1 million. So in communities maybe that do not have they don't perceive they have the economic need to provide this, they're having an addition to their budget that they're not necessarily asking for. So I think you're going to see this conversation play out differently across different communities.
Yeah, Senator Pearson.
Thank you. Sean, it's an intriguing, you offer sort of the juxtaposition of the great benefits in Winooski. And in particular, as I was listening to your comments, I was coming to the phrase of intangible benefits, right? We don't know how to measure what does it mean to have kids that are a bit happier or learn to compost or getting better nutrition in the data-driven sense. But I want to draw a little bit on your former experience at CVU, a school I know somewhat about because my spouse teaches there. And everybody recognizes CVU. Nobody feels bad about a little pinch on CVU's budget, right? In the state, they're a well-resourced school. But there are a lot of kids at CVU who come from, the lower end of the economic spectrum, no question. And I worry that, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, I actually think those kids are probably less likely to take advantage of the current universe where their parents get them eligible for free and reduced lunch, or the family is just above those income levels. And because there are a lot of wealthy kids in that district, the stigma issue gets amplified. And so I wonder, we're not going to have a quantitative answer here, but in your opinion, these tangible benefits of just dealing with food as part of the way we deal with textbooks and broader education, isn't it likely that even as we look at wealthier districts, there would be pretty significant potential for that benefit and to actually equalize some of these divides that we struggle with as a society at large?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure that things have even progressed further at CVU, knowing that organization well since I left there 8 years ago. I would say we were working at CVU to alleviate that stigma as much as possible. And that stigma was part of a broader stigma that wasn't just around meals, but around enrollment in classes, around social cliques, around participation in various activities, all kinds of different things. So it was a much broader kind of inclusion and equity issue than just meals at a place like CVU. And I know that they continually work really hard to bridge those. So I think that's where I'm kind of getting at with my wondering about data, because I know in talking with Hunger Free Vermont, it's not just students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, but there are kids who don't qualify that are kind of, we refer as kind of in between, right? So they don't have the resources, but they don't qualify for supports. And there are more of those kids that came to the surface from the prior federal administration as requirements changed. And I think we'll see that start to shift back and more kids will be eligible. But that's why I guess I am advocating for a little more targeted data about how many kids are we talking about? And is there a way for us to look at that data and then make a little more precision, a little more precise decision about how to go about this? Universal, I mean, you can't go wrong, right, with universal, because you're providing it to everybody. Also, the funding, as we know, is so important, and we need to do that right. Otherwise, we will end up with, a couple of years down the road looking at each other and going, holy mackerel, we've got all of these costs. We did the right thing at the time, but did we think it through and do it with a long-term sustainability lens?
So let's just talk a little bit more about the cost, because the note I saw from Chittenden South was, as you referenced, $1 million price tag if you do this to us. And I don't know how to uncover this, and maybe Faye and Jim and others have a sense, but it struck me that they're suggesting that Chittenden South is 4% of the entire cost to the state here. If we agree, it's going to be about $25 million, which seems unlikely. And I wonder if that, do you have any sense of whether or not the estimate allows for the increase in federal funding, even if you're not qualifying through the community? I forget the terminology, but there are ways. We would anticipate any school in Vermont that moves to universal is going to draw down more federal dollars. And it just struck me that I'm not confident that they have applied the actual experience formula, as opposed to just sort of, here we are today, here's the more kids we'll have to feed, and here's the balance. Any sense of whether or not that nuance is well understood out there?
No, I think that there's probably other people in the Zoom room here that would be better equipped to answer that question for you. I can tell you, with a complicated legislative session underway and during a pandemic, I think that all superintendents and their offices are doing the best they can to provide the best analysis that they can in a very unique circumstances right now.
Yeah. Brian, Senator Collmore.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This committee normally, because it's the Senate Agriculture Committee, doesn't begin to get under the surface of most of the educational discussion that we're having. With all due respect, I think our chair does, because he was on the school board for many, many years up in Troy. So I'm still trying to understand the 40% trigger allows a school to have free and reduced or universal. And are they the same thing or not? And so that's one question I have. And then the second question is, it seems like if you're over the 40% or at the 40% and over, you would be in a much more favorable position than schools that aren't, because you're already there, so to speak, and you're not adding additional tax burden. Am I sort of getting this correct? And I don't mean the question necessarily for you, Sean. Anybody can answer it.
Maybe Rosie could answer that about the 40% and what it does and reduced and free meals where that blends in.
Yeah.
So maybe Rosie?
I'm happy to do that. So every public school in the state, with a very few exceptions, participates in the federal National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, which mean that we offer that meals are available to all children, but that children who do not qualify by either submitting an application or through some other means, they have to pay for the meal. So everybody can get a meal, but some kids have to pay. And some kids have their meal paid for by either the state and federal government or just the federal government if they are low enough income. So that's what's operating everywhere. And then we have some schools, and it's about somewhere around 70 schools, school buildings, not school districts, and that includes a number of independent schools, who are high enough poverty that they're able to participate in some of these federal options to provide free meals for all students. And the feds pay a larger share of those. So in Winooski's case, they are participating in the community eligibility provision, which is the kind of more financially advantageous option that's available only to the highest poverty schools. And to participate in that program, at least 40% of your children need to be directly certified for free school meals. So that's different than just eligible for free and reduced school meals. That normal eligibility threshold is where households submit applications. But the direct certification threshold, this category of directly certified kids, is a group of kids who we know that they qualify for free and reduced meals from some information other than the household. So mostly these are kids who are living in households that are receiving 3 Squares Vermont or Reach Up benefits. So DCF has already verified that their income is below this threshold. So we are very, very certain that these households qualify. We take that as it's almost better information than what we would get on the application, because when the household submits an application, we're verifying 3% of those applications, but there's a good shot that the family could submit some information either intentionally or unintentionally that isn't fully correct. And so we don't take that as kind of perfect information the way we do this category of directly certified kids. So that's why there's this, and I'm kind of getting in the weeds here on this community eligibility provision, but that's why there's this group of extremely high poverty schools who have at least 40% of their students who are directly certified for free school meals, which is different than their free and reduced eligibility rate. And that can be very, very confusing for folks because those are 2 different numbers that get thrown around. This group of folks, we can take the percentage of kids who are directly certified for meals and we can multiply that by 1.6%, or sorry, 1.6. And that gets us to the free and reduced claiming rate that the feds allow us to claim. So if a school has 60% of their students who are directly certified, then the feds pay for every single meal for free. And Winooski has kind of hovered around that threshold. I think they're down around 50% now off the top of my head. But basically the feds pay for almost all the meals for free at Winooski. And Winooski has to just come up with a small number for a small amount of money to augment that. That's not the case for the vast majority of schools in Vermont. So we've already offered this program and we work really hard with every school who meets that threshold. Every year in April, we're collecting the numbers to see who qualifies. We work with those schools, we push it really hard. And so we're already offering meals using the federal money at all those schools that we can. And so really what you're talking about here is going beyond that and saying, okay, the state is going to put in the money, whether it's at the local level or at the federal level, but somehow we're going to put in the money that the feds aren't putting in. So the estimate you've got from JFO already takes into account the fact that there are these high poverty schools who are already operating these federal provisions to get the most federal money possible. And that additional cost that the JFO estimate is including really reflects kind of that additional cost that we're going to have to take on that's outside of what the feds are already going to pay. And Senator Pearson is right that there would be additional federal funds coming in because the feds do supplement the paid meals. They subsidize those to some extent. But that 24, $25 to $40 million additional cost is on top of what the feds would be paying. So that is additional cost to the state. And it, we can't say, oh, we're going to get additional federal money and that's going to reduce that amount. We've already taken that into account.
Just to be clear, I'm trying to make sure we understand, some districts are coming forward with estimates for us. And
yeah, and I don't know that those districts understand. I would look at that whole number. I wouldn't necessarily vouch for the specific estimates that specific districts are coming forward with.
Because, and we received letters from some school districts about how bad the bill was, but they're already in the universal meals program. So I don't know where those school districts are coming from, or the one or two that we received letters from opposed to the universal meals program, and their schools were in the program. So
I can't really speak for them, but I think that one of the concerns might be that, they're already drawing down all these federal funds, and they're going to have their property taxes are going to go up as a result of the state paying for these meals for kids in more affluent districts. And so it's not, it may not necessarily impact their school budget directly, but it may impact property tax rates in their town. And, they're already taking advantage of this federal money. And so I think that might be where they're coming from, although I certainly can't speak for them.
Why don't we move on to Jeannie Collins? Are you with us?
I am. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not going to turn off my camera because I am at a rest area on a toll road, and I want to make sure that I have stable internet. Went to visit my 92-year-old mother this weekend. So, but thank you, Chairman Starr and senators, for the opportunity to add to your discussion. And I really appreciated listening to Rosie and Sean also. I am Jeannie Collins. I am superintendent of the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union, and I am immediate past president of the Vermont Superintendents Association, whom I'm also speaking for today. As you know, as you've already heard, this bill is of considerable interest to Vermont superintendents because as superintendents absolutely believe in proper nutrition and feeding children, we also must maintain a constant eye on competing priorities and program costs. S100 is absolutely a laudable bill in its intent. In my former district, I did have schools that were eligible for the community eligibility program, and we were able to feed all kids in the schools. And over this past year in Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union, with the federal waivers under COVID, we were also able or are also able to feed all students. As Sean pointed out, feeding all students is clearly beneficial in having the students ready to learn and able to focus on schoolwork. It relieves the burden from parents from providing lunches or funds, and also removes any stigma from students who access the free and reduced lunch program. Obviously, we have worked hard over the years to remove that stigma, but it still rears its head. My own kids, when they moved from a high poverty school district to a wealthier school district at the ages of 9 and 10, asked me why I had to send money in with them for lunch. Why shouldn't kids just get fed like they were in their old school? So it's kind of out of the mouths of babes. Kids just kind of expect that they'll be fed. So I absolutely agree with all of the benefits that Sean said, and I support the fact that this bill is in discussion, and I support the fact that it continue to be in discussion. I also want to bring your attention to my concerns with the funding and answer any questions you might have around that so that you can have a full and thoughtful discussion. First, if the current bill were approved, it would mandate feeding all kids regardless of their ability to pay at a local expense. That may mean other programs cannot happen. And Senator Starr, you had some questions around this, so let me see if I can help. So as Rosie just said, this program, after the current existing CEP programs and what school districts are already doing, after all of that, will add $24 million to $40 million in new costs to the state of Vermont. If those costs were covered in the local budgets, then if a budget is reduced, either through the budget making process or as a result of a budget defeat, the school district will have to cut another program, such as reading coaches or social emotional learning, because essentially this would be an unfunded mandate. The pressure with that, if I go back to my colleague Amy Rex in Milton, and the fact that adding this to her district would cost $750,000 based upon her current programs, she only passed a budget by 17 votes in March. I mean, that $750,000 could easily have led to that budget being defeated, and then she would have to cut something else based on this unfunded mandate. So for that reason, the Vermont Superintendents Association asked that if S100 is approved by the Senate, that a statewide source of funds be provided. So let's talk a little about what that could mean. If the source of funds provided comes from the general fund, there is no increase in the property taxes. If the source of funds is the top of the education fund, there will be a property tax increase between 2.7 cents and 4.4 cents across all districts, including Sean's and Winooski, because the education fund is a pooled fund. So as I understand it, the committee is considering funding this program from the top of the education fund. And this approach addresses my concerns about the unfunded mandate and the local budget dynamics. But I just want you to understand that using the ed fund does come with an increased tax burden across the entire state, just to talk that through. Again, at the estimated total cost of a $24 million to $40 million new expenses statewide, education property taxes before school districts do anything at all would increase from 2.7 cents to 4.4 cents simply to cover the cost of this program. And this comes from the Joint Fiscal Office, these numbers. The Joint Fiscal Office also says that $9 million in new costs adds 1 cent to the education property tax statewide. So that's where these numbers come from. It's also important to note that a tax increase, I already said this, to raise the total new money would affect all districts. So back to speaking for myself, I absolutely support that this discussion is happening. And I'd like this discussion to continue happening because it's the right thing to do for students and for families. But the discussion needs to include how are we going to fund it and how do we raise that money annually? And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I believe Senator Pearson has a question.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm glad you support this conversation happening, and I just have to point out that basically the superintendents probably are going a long way to killing the conversation, unfortunately. So the way you've shown up has been noted by colleagues, and if we're unsuccessful, it will be because of the clampdown, rather than saying, this is a great conversation, let's continue to work together. That has not been the tone, and it's had a very, very real impact. But I want to talk specifically about the source of funding, and just be curious on your opinion. I'm going to ask JFO the same question. I sit on Senate Finance. Last spring, in the midst of the heart of the stay-at-home order, we were all basically freaking out because the ed fund had a projected deficit of 150 million on a good day, more like 160 million. And that was a 26-cent increase on the property tax, something like that. We chose not to react to that deficit, recognizing that it was incredibly volatile and we didn't know what the rest of the year would bring forward. It turns out what the rest of the year brought forward was a hearty consumption appetite from Vermonters, in part stimulated by federal stimulus, saving money maybe on takeout or restaurants, I don't know. But people bought a lot of stuff, and the sales tax well outperformed any expectations. And so my question to you is, how can anybody sit here and tell us if we add a $25 million expense, we will increase property taxes, and just dismiss the fact that the sales tax is going gangbusters? Isn't it more accurate to say we will add $25 million pressure to the ed fund, and maybe that will be covered by property tax? We'll need to turn to the property tax, but maybe it'll be covered by the sales tax. By this time next year, it's anticipated cannabis will be in stores. That impacts the sales tax. There's a lot of reason to think that the sales tax projections will continue to go up, and therefore maybe we won't see any impact on the property tax. Isn't that also a fair projection, or at least a fair thing that we need to acknowledge, or am I really not understanding how the ed fund works?
Thanks for asking. First of all, the early comment that superintendents wish to kill the bill. We haven't polled superintendents across the state. VSA hasn't yet, but I do know that, talking to my colleagues, that the majority of us feel the way I do, that this is something we need to do, but we can't do it separately from understanding the funding. Can't be a separate discussion.
Let me just clarify. I'm not saying you've expressed a desire to kill the bill. I'm saying the way you've shown up about the funding may kill the bill. So you have to be careful as you express support and send us letters that effectively kill the bill. That's all I'm saying. I'd love us to figure out. I'm deeply committed to working together to advance this important priority and acknowledge the financial reality for districts. Totally, that's where I'm at. I just need you to understand you carry a lot of weight in this process, and you have at a minimum caused us a week delay, and we'll see how much more.
Well, thank you. I would say that we also want to work closely to see this go forward and address the fiscal pieces. Your specific question is really a joint fiscal office question, but from a superintendent's perspective, I don't do a budget a year at a time. I am so appreciative that the ed fund got more monies as people were spending more, myself included, sitting at home. And I very much appreciate the federal funds that are coming our way for the next couple of years. And I'm looking ahead at the cliff at the end of the federal monies coming in. And I'm always, as a superintendent, looking ahead at the cliff. How do I situate my district so that we can continue to, educate in a quality manner, as my taxpayers and the governor and the legislature are always talking about how school budgets are going up. So that's where I think, the funding concern comes in. It just simply needs to be part of the discussion. And if you are absolutely right, and cannabis, great use of it, and other sales taxes don't make the impact in the short term or in the immediacy of this increase, I think that would be fabulous, because the concept of feeding all kids is wonderful, but we can't turn a blind eye that there is a cost to it.
Yes, Sean?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think that, there's this increased sense of urgency that has been foundational for the past year for leaders and decision makers. And so I think the notion of slowing the process down shouldn't necessarily be seen as a negative component. I think there is a lot to consider. There's a lot of federal dollars. There's a lot of impacts budgetarily on real human beings, real Vermonters that need to be considered and considered within a much broader context, so that we make good decisions, like I said, for the long-term sustainability. And to add to that, I also wonder whether we should be thinking about this as a general fund expense, because this is about all of our kids. And this is a community need and I think a desire. And schools have been saddled with the expenses of a lot of the social needs over time. And some of us have embraced those, and it's cost us, because we've embraced those, and it's cost us the ability to spend on other things that we know we need. So if we look at this more broadly and think about it as a broad community, statewide, general need, I don't see why we wouldn't be considering it in the general fund instead of putting more pressure on the ed fund.
Well, over the weekend, I thought a lot about the funding of this, and shouldn't the funding though be a shared funding deal where, if the locals really feel like this is good for the children, if you don't have any skin in the game, as they say, what the heck. But if you've got some skin in the game, seems as though you get a better perspective and a better outlook on how things run, how things operate, have some interest in keeping the cost as low as possible. And so what about a shared type of system where, the state puts some money in from the general fund, but yet the school districts put some money in. You guys are getting, what, 300 million of new federal dollars to pay for a lot of expenses that you normally would have to take out of your school budget to do. And so isn't there a little extra money there where the district could help some?
May I jump in?
Well, I don't want you guys to trip over each other. But no, what's your perspective on that, Jean?
We are getting federal funds, and those federal funds will end. Half of them will end in 2022 and the other half in 2023. So, and my understanding is these funds cannot be used for school nutrition, but I will leave that to other people who know better about that. But yes, so we are getting funds, but they will end. And again, there will need to be, that needs to be funded from somewhere. The question about the local budgets is whether it's a mandate or not.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking, from my past years, sometimes at a school with very little or no state help anymore, if you're going to make improvements, they're long-term improvements that, you may pay for over 10 years or even longer. I know our school, we just bonded for $1.5 million a couple of years ago to upgrade the building and, do all the good things that a good educational system should have. Well, if we'd had this federal money come in, we would have used that to cover quite a lot of those expenses back then. And so our tax rate wouldn't have had to have gone up as much, and we'd have had money to do other things with that money. So I would hope that schools are going to use this money for not for tomorrow's needs or yesterday's needs, but for needs that stretch out for a period of time. And then take that money and use it for other things. And we've done this in Montpelier. Now, this is the second year that we taken federal money that couldn't be used for certain things and used it for things that it could be used for, but kept that other money to help everyone else out. I don't know if you folks have an opinion on that, Sean?
Yeah, I think Chairman Starr, you've just laid out some of the complexity of what districts are dealing with, and I'll just speak from my own perspective. As you probably know, our community in Winooski passed a sorely needed capital project ban for over $57 million. So while we've been fortunate to procure a very low interest note with USDA over 30 years, we now have that debt service in our budget to cope with. So, districts are making different decisions, and, we had to make that decision because we had to, because of our building's condition, and there was a moratorium on school construction aid. So I guess that's where I get back to the point of like, there needs to be real coherence around the priorities that districts have, that the organizations like VSA, VSBA, and the legislature and the governor's office have around education, because there are many things that are really, really important, and we have a responsibility to do what's best for our students and for our citizens. And we have to always balance that with the tension of people's ability to absorb these costs.
Yeah. So basically, what you folks would like to see, or where you'd like us to go, is to, I don't even like mentioning it, but to spend another year studying this thing. And in Montpelier, my colleagues love to study stuff, and I hate studying stuff. I mean, I like to reach a decision and move on, and maybe that's gonna have to change, but maybe some of the other committee members are, if you have questions or concerns, or do you have any other questions for Jean? I see your hand up, Jeannie. Did you want to weigh in?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to stress that I'm not asking for a year-long study committee either. Actually, I think if this leaves your committee and it goes to the House, the discussion continues. So, I think we just need to come to a common agreement that feeding all students is the right thing to do. And if we own doing that, then let's talk about the best way to fund it and move forward with that. It's not about whether or not we should feed students. And I, like you, would hate to postpone this.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I see Sean's got his thumbs up, and I think we've studied this to death, and we need to figure out how to pay for it and go forward. Chris?
Jeannie's saying she's lost sound. Well, I'll just tell you the challenge from where I sit is there's something that nobody in the state cares about other than the 180 people involved in the legislature, and that's our own internal schedule that basically says if the Senate doesn't advance this bill this week, we don't, the House doesn't have the obligation to take it up. Now, we can often work around those deadlines, but they're generally, hurdles that get put up, and that is the challenge of the moment we're in. Do we settle on a funding source, or do we agree that we're committed to this goal and acknowledge that we have some work to do before we settle out that source? As of right now, because of the posture of you and your colleagues, our colleagues in the Senate are saying we've got to sort this out more thoroughly, and that's where the project may end up slipping, and that's just the reality of it. None of us think that the finances here are trivial, but it's my hope we can advance this, celebrating where we are in common, and also being committed to a good solution by the end of our process that everybody can support.
The other thing that we have, going for us, at least it's the first year of a 2-year session. And, even if we get the bill to the House in some form, and if they don't reach a decision by the end of the session, we still have the summer to work on trying to figure this out and getting it done next year. Whereas if we were in the second year, if we didn't move it, it would be all over when we go home. So, I'm glad we got onto this early, but I think if the superintendents and principals, if they'd be willing to work with us as legislators, in moving it forward, it would be most helpful. Other questions, Sean?
Yeah, I just had a question for the committee. Given the timeline, I'm sure that you've given a lot of thought to what are the potential funding sources. So I'm just wondering, if you're concerned about time, is there a way in bringing the bill to keep moving it? Because there's nothing I hate more than studying the study. Is how do you create some flexibility, or at least some implied flexibility, in how this could be funded to keep the kind of the creativity open in the House and across the whole legislature, that this is important. We just need to figure out how to do it. And so I ask you, what do you see as the potential sources?
Well, as Chris mentioned earlier, surprisingly, our economy is doing pretty darn well. And, we need to use some of this federal money that we're getting at the state level to do some long-term, take care of some long-term expenditures that we were going to have to use general fund to cover. And usually we have bigger fights when there's too much money than when there isn't enough money. And we're almost in one of those situations where there's too much money, so we're all fighting over who's going to get, the dollars and who isn't. And I think we need to, as Chris sits on finance and I sit on appropriations, we need to talk to our other committee members in those two rooms to see and to figure out, well, where can we get some of this money without causing a lot of pain down the road on our school districts, but yet get a worthy cause done and get it pushed forward. Are there other questions for Sean or Jeannie before we excuse them? Or because it's been very good of you to give us as much time as you have, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you do, and we'll
Mr. Chair,
look to the association for some help and guidance as we move forward. Are there any other questions that you have of us?
No, I
Before-
really thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I think it's a really important discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie. And Sean, Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. There's a strike all that Jim Demaray made. I haven't had a chance to read all the way through, but
Yeah.
from what I can see, much of it is aspirational, and much of it is something I think that everybody can agree with. It just says that to the extent possible, we're going to try to feed as many kids as we possibly can by securing as much federal money. The sticking point, and I'm looking at it now, and forgive me if you don't have the advantage of looking at it, but I think the sticking point is on page 3, right at the top of the page, which says, to the extent that costs are not reimbursed through federal or state funds or other sources, the cost of making available school lunches and breakfast shall be borne by school districts. I mean, I think that's in essence the very crux of the problem here, or the crux of the issue, I should say. I don't know that it's a problem, but and I think that's where a lot of the pushback from our fellow colleagues in the Senate, and I'm not suggesting that we delete that, but if that were not in the bill, I think the rest of it is something that everybody could agree to after reading it. Because as I say, most of the rest of it is just very aspirational and hopes that we can do whatever we can to push this along. I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah. Jim had to jump off and go to some other committee for, I think, Dad. To testify on some work he's doing for them or somebody. So he isn't with us right now. But maybe we could take up his language in the morning and go through that. But I think, we need to talk to some of our colleagues and to see what they'll buy. And to move this to the other chamber so we can keep working on it with them. We've had 16 or 14. No, we've had 18 people vote in favor of our bill from one place or another. And I'm sure we lost some of those, but if we can fix it so that people feel comfortable, it's important, I think, to move it to the other chamber and keep working on a solution to this funding. Thank you, Sean, for being with us, and appreciate your time, and good luck to you there at the school.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again.
Take care.
Chris?
well, we've got Scott Fay on. I've worked with him a little bit last year. He's a good guy, but I don't know if he's just wondering if we have questions or meant to offer comments himself.
Yeah, Scott, are you with us? There you are. Yeah, well, thank you for being on. So how are things in Westford? Do you use universal meals, and how? No?
We don't. We're right now offering universal meals through the USDA waivers, COVID waivers, but
Yeah.
we do not have enough of a free and reduced population. But I did have something I wanted to share with you today, and I really appreciate you guys having me. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my thoughts and perspectives. It's really exciting that Vermont is on the cusp of permanently moving to universal meals. This will allow school food programs to support students with the nutrition they need to succeed at school and allow them to maintain their dignity in the lunchroom. And I'm here to recommend that you amend the bill to shift the funding for the increased costs to come off the top of the education fund rather than individual districts. The funding source will have a major impact on where districts focus the energy and resources of their nutrition programs. In particular, the quality and equality of nutrition programs across the state will be in jeopardy if the funding is left to individual school districts. Funded locally, districts with low free and reduced rates, like Essex Westford, South Burlington, and CVU, will receive minimal federal funding and be faced with higher overall costs. These districts will be under pressure to keep meal costs low and will be forced to raise offsetting revenues that will reduce the financial impact of the meal program on the district. Districts with high free and reduced rates will receive more funding, federal funding, and less financial stress. Districts will look to robust a la carte programs like snack bars and vending machines that generate revenues by selling snacks, drinks, and meal components. Students with cash on hand could purchase snacks and in effect opt out of the meal program. A la carte items are not reimbursable and therefore only available to students with access to money. In other words, the school lunch stigma remains, and by forcing schools into these strategies, the separation of those that have and those that have not still exists. Funded off the top of the Ed Fund, using a per plate reimbursement would allow districts to focus on producing and promoting top quality meal programs. In this scenario, we're focused on serving high quality, complete meals that appeal to students and provide the nourishment they need to learn. This is our end goal, at least it should be, providing high quality, nutritious meals that help students succeed at school. The district's success will be based on their ability to budget within the reimbursement rate, maintain high participation, maximize federal funds, and leverage the local purchasing incentive. USDA's COVID waivers are currently utilizing per plate reimbursement. It's a method that districts are familiar with and has worked well for the past year. During COVID at the Essex Westford School District, we've closed our a la carte lines and snack bars and focused all of our energy on the meal program. With that posturing, our serving lines have changed. More students are participating in the meal program and no one is purchasing snacks. Higher participation and a focus on a strong meal program helps to normalize the serving lines to the point where everyone feels comfortable. There's no stigma around the meal program. This is the most valuable silver lining we've found in our COVID service plan. With S100 funding coming off the top of the Ed Fund through a per plate reimbursement, we'll keep our snack bars closed and convert those spaces to meal service lines. Our students will be eating healthy, well-balanced, complete meals. We'll be purchasing more local products, and we'll be fully focused on providing and promoting the best possible meal program we can for our students. In closing, I ask that you please amend Bill S100 so the funding comes off the top of the education fund and reimburses districts on a per plate basis. Puts Vermont's districts on a level playing field, and rather than worry about generating offsetting revenues, districts can focus on providing quality meal programs and encourage participation, ensure good fiscal stewardship, and have the best chance at equality in meal programs across the state. By doing so, our collective energy and financial resources can be directed where they should be, providing the best possible meal service to Vermont students and finally removing the lunch stigma.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott. So you're doing the federal meals program at the present, and that's working very well. And what about your participation from students? Are they all pretty much taking part in your meals program?
So kind of it depends on the age group. It seems like our middle school kids are least likely to participate. They're at about 70% right now. Our K through 5 is upwards of 80% participation. And our high school is in the 75 to 80% range. Now, that being said, it's kind of hard to measure right now because attendance is because of being remote and hybrid and classrooms being quarantined, it's hard to get a really solid number.
Yeah. The, well, yeah, I like your idea of taking that, right out of the ed fund and everybody. I don't want to shortchange schools that are it's gonna cost them a lot of money to do this. I don't I don't think that was our committee's intention at all. Are there questions for Scott from the committee members? Chris?
Scott, just tell us that you said your low water point is about 70% participation in middle school?
Right now, it's about 65 or so more.
Well, that's pretty good.
It's
I would
very
think.
good.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah.
And what the universal meals have done for us is allowed us to really focus on meals. And the idea that in order to be successful, we need to produce something that kids really want to eat. Even kids that sometimes have food at home that they can bring with them. But it's important that everybody eats, again, so that we can take that stigma away. And yeah.
Have
Well,
you?
to say nothing of the community of eating together.
Absolutely.
But do you think it's inherent in your strategy that districts will close the snack line, as to use the term of art you've used? Do you think that they will all see the wisdom of that approach?
I would hope. It's crystal clear to me. It wasn't our intention going into COVID, but because of germ spread and whatnot, we closed the snack bar. And what we saw was an increase in meal participation. And when you look at what we sell, type of snacks in the snack bar, and the snacks are all USDA, they're Smart Snack compliant, so there's a process for that. But if we're sell a bagel to a student for, say, $1.75, we may see 85, we spend 85 cents to sell them that bagel, we get 85 cents back. If we sell a meal, right now the reimbursement rate is $4.50. It may cost us $2.50 in food for that meal, but our margin is so much bigger that, like right now, we've never bought grapes and clementines, and we're buying more produce than I've seen in my 15 years at Essex Westford. And it's because the revenues we're generating are allowing us to improve our program, improve our meals, and now they're even more appealing to kiddos. We're doing more scratch cooking this year during COVID than I've seen in my 15 years here. So we're super excited looking into next year, laying groundwork right now based on these silver linings that we found. And we're kind of re-envisioning what our program is going to look like. And if we can pull this off, my real concern would be worrying about offsetting those costs and focusing more on how do we generate revenues that are going to drive down our bill. Generally, school food service or child nutrition programs, we're at the end of the year, we look at our finances and what isn't, well, if we're in the red, that's the deficit. So it's always, well, what kind of deficit do you have? And we're charged constantly with driving that down and trying to break even. My concern would be losing our focus. Right now, we're super laser focused on meals, and just to see that momentum and what it's done in 1 year, I would love to see us be able to continue that without the distraction of having to offset that cost at the district level.
Yep. Other questions from any of the committee for Scott? If not, not, thanks a lot, Scott, for your time this morning. Certainly appreciate it. And stay tuned because we're going
Will
to
do.
try to do something.
Great. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much. I appreciate everything you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Chris, did we just get a notice of a meeting at 12:15? No?
No, it's canceled today, so that
Okay,
it may
okay.
be in your calendar, but it's not actually happening. Allison said as much on the floor.
Yeah. Faye, are you with us?
I am. Hi.
Hi. Well, what do you think?
I really appreciated being able to hear from the two different superintendents today and hear the conversation that you all had with them, as well as Scott's perspective. I think his point about how just the impact the Universal School Meals has had on his school this year, and if the funding for the increased cost associated with Universal School Meals were to come off the top of the Ed Fund, how that would shift the perspective of the school meal program toward focusing on nutritious school meals and really doing everything they can to have students eat that was really helpful to hear, and something that I hadn't thought of until he had said that. So I appreciated that. I know Senator Starr, you had asked Hunger Free Vermont to work with Jim on some language to consider how to collectively pay for the increased cost of universal school meals across the state. And that's what he's put together. So I'd be happy to be here tomorrow if you all are going to review that and talk a little bit about that perspective. I can share, I'll share now as you all have a chance to take a look at what he put together, that the idea was to really model off of the way that school meal programs are funded they're funded generally with per plate reimbursements from either the federal government or the state in different ways. And that's what this establishes for the meals that would be receiving just a very small reimbursement from the federal government. It doesn't necessarily, it helps create a cost sharing model where the meal reimbursement would be paid collectively across the state, but school meal programs would still be responsible for developing a budget, and that would just be an additional source of revenue as they're developing their budget and what will make their budget, what will fill their budget. So it's similar in a way to what the state has already done with reduced price meals. And so be happy to chat about that tomorrow or today, but I know it's noon.
Yeah, we'll probably do that the first thing in the morning because we start right off at 9, so that'll give us some extra time. Chris?
Well, I look forward to tomorrow, but it doesn't strike me that, as we heard from Jeannie Collins, this isn't a slam dunk, but it's moving towards them. Maybe this is a decent compromise that doesn't have them standing with us, but has them not opposing it in the same manner to keep the conversation going. My question, though, is we've talked about our draft has a 5-year phase in, and Joint Fiscal, when I was jawing with them about some of the options, has basically assumed that most schools won't do anything for 4 years and then they'll deal with it in the 5th year, which to me is a shame. As we just heard from Scott, every school is doing this now, and so I'm wondering what everybody thinks. And Faye, if you, in your work with this community, is it totally unrealistic if we're going to say this isn't landing on your local budget for us to just say this begins immediately? And I just worry about the momentum, and really having it plummet. And Rosie's about to tell us why that's totally unworkable. But people are doing it now, and so taking a year off seems sort of dumb to me. And if we're willing to foot the bill, is that something we should consider? I mean, I don't like compromising and only giving. Maybe we can get a little something out.
That's a heck of a way to compromise when you only give.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think Rosie has a perspective to share too on this. I think if it's, personally from our experience in talking with schools, even if it stayed as it is, where schools are covering the full expense in their individual school budget, I don't think you would see all the schools waiting until 5 years. We know there are schools who've experienced universal schools meals this year and are sold on the impact that it has and are interested in moving forward. If the funding structure is shifted to mirror something more like the amendment that Jim has drafted for you, where there's a per plate reimbursement off the top to help offset some of the costs for individual schools, I think you'll see more schools moving more quickly. For a number of schools, that's really doable and feasible to move that quickly in 1 year. Some will still need a bit of time. So the window is helpful for that. One of the challenges that we've had as we've been talking about this over the last couple of years is that we don't know, you can't just divide all of the schools that are left by 5 and assume it will be an even distribution across 5 years. We aren't quite sure how it will play out. But I think that if the funding were to shift to be off the top of the education fund, you would see more schools moving in this next year. The other thing I would add too, before turning over to Rosie to share, is that there was a lot of conversation today about all of the kind of changes that are whirling around from the federal level. And some of those, I think all of those help universal school meals. There are changes that Congress may consider this year that would just help make universal school meals more affordable for the state. There's nothing that Congress is considering that would make it more expensive for the state. It's all a really positive direction. And we should know at some point in the next couple of months if the waivers that schools are using this year will be extended through another school year. And that's a possibility from USDA, in which case you'd see another year of school meals being universal, but under the model that's happening this year. And then the transition starting with the bill. But it would be great to have the bill in place so that schools can really start preparing whether or not the waivers are extended for this year.
Yeah, thank you, Faye. Rosie,
So yeah, I actually, I'm not here to rain on your parade. I think that if it was funded at the state level, we would actually see almost 100% of folks decide to opt in the first year because it's really
that much in favor.
Well, it's really no different than what they're doing now. And so if the state's going to pay for it, why not? So I would be very surprised to see really very many schools that all decide not to do it next year if it was funded at the state level. I think, and so that's something that I want you to consider in terms of the cost, because you have been assuming this 5-year phase in. We don't know when the exact cost will hit, but certainly if it was done at the state level, I would advise you to assume all of the cost would hit in the first year. The other thing I want you to be aware of is that if it all hits in the first year, it's going to be a big impact on my team because there's a lot we have to do in year 1 to get folks set up to do this particular provision. We have to do a lot of looking at their specific applications. Now, you included initially in the bill a position for child nutrition programs, and I just want to flag for you that particularly if you switched it to funding at the state level, that would absolutely be critical for successful implementation. So if you're looking at switching to that, I really want to highlight for you that we really need that position.
Now, your boss told us that they were going to move somebody from one department that they're closing down or?
Well,
or-
so I think that conversation got a little muddled because the legislature would still need to approve those changes in order for them to have position savings, and it doesn't sound like that's going to move this year. So that's really contingent. In order to do that internally, that's really contingent on the legislature making that decision to approve those changes in home study, and it didn't seem like that was a sure thing. So given that, I want to flag for you that we would really need the additional position specifically spelled out and highlighted, that you couldn't rely on that just coming internally from the agency. If you leave it funded at the school level, I think we'd advised that it likely wouldn't be everybody implementing next year, even though they've been doing it for the past year, simply because they haven't included it in their school budgets. So all of them have already passed school budgets, with the exception of those couple folks whose budgets failed, and they didn't include this. And so if it ends up being a significant cost, in order for them to add this next year, it's not in the budget. So I would imagine if you leave it at the school level, it at least would be before, some of them would do it next year. They'd find some funds somewhere. But a lot of them would probably wait until year 2 or 3. And I would expect at some point there'll be a tipping point where everybody looks around and realizes that everybody else is doing this and we're all paying for it, so we may as well do it. And then at that point, everybody would kind of jump in and do it. So I don't think it would be even over 5 years, but I can't tell you when that tipping point would be. One other piece I wanted to just flag for you, because I was sort of thinking about how could you maintain some sort of phase in. One option for you to consider if you're thinking about worried about cost and worried about jumping in year 1, doing it all at once, is to consider the state paying for the paid student share of breakfast only and just mandating breakfast. That would have a significantly lower cost. My back of the envelope calculations were somewhere between $8 and $14 million per year. And you would still get a lot of the benefits that Sean was describing, with student attendance and with being able to kind of have that community feeling at the beginning of the day. And so that would be sort of a halfway point, but a really significant halfway point, that would make a significant difference to families, but would end up costing the state significantly less money. And then you could see how that goes, how participation is, and decide whether to go from there. And that might be enough of a difference for some schools to decide, okay, the state's paying for breakfast, can we take on the cost of lunch? I don't know, I have nothing to evaluate that, but I would imagine that could be something that they would think about on the local level. So I just wanted to throw that out. I know that the finances of this are complicated, but that's something that you could look at doing if you wanted to kind of have some sort of compromise there.
What is the reimbursement on breakfasts, Rosie?
I believe it's $1.85 is the full reimbursement. Hang on, I can pull the numbers up for you. So the state would end up paying $1.59. The full a federal reimbursement for the free breakfast is $1.89. Paid is 32 cents, and so the difference is $1.59. So you'd be paying $1.59 per paid meal.
Yep. Questions for Rosie from anyone? Anthony, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I just want to express my frustration, quite honestly. But the more I listen to the conversation, I have not engaged in it very much. I've been listening to it, obviously, but I'm coming to the conclusion that some kind of phase-in is really maybe the way to something we need to explore. I mean, whether it's doing the breakfast as Rosie just said, or doing something where you actually limit the number of schools that can do it in the first year. If we don't expect everybody to do it in the first year anyway, limit the program and let a number of X number of schools do it, or districts do it in the first year or two, and then others see that it's working there, and it builds from there. So we would build support for statewide funding as well. So I don't know. I don't have any grandiose ideas. I just think that maybe some kind of phase in is something worth considering pretty strongly.
Would, Rosie, if a school district was going to do this and move forward with universal meals, wouldn't they have to contact you folks at AOE, or would they?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a whole, assuming they're going to do provision 2, which is the provision that's available to everybody, but still costs a significant amount of local money if they're not really high free and reduced. They need to notify us in the summer or early fall that they're planning to do this. And basically the drop dead deadline to start doing provision 2, to have come up with the funding and do the paperwork and everything is October 1st. They can do
Right.
something called delayed implementation, where they actually charge the students for meals in the first month and then stop charging after that month. So we do have that. They can't just start it in November, but there is a little bit of time at the start of the school year there.
So
And they do have to let us know.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. I can
Rosie
get-
and Mr. Chair, I'm assuming we all got to go, but I can't help myself.
Yeah.
Rosie, are you hearing, do you get any smoke signals from USDA on this idea of pulling in the whole next school year? This again comes back to my momentum concept and real opportunity. So anyway, I'm curious if you're hearing anything.
So I believe that Secretary Vilsack said in some public venue that they expected to let us know by the end of April what next year would look like. I don't know that they currently have the authority from Congress to extend the waivers as they have been through the next school year. I think that's why they're currently extended through September 30th. I would imagine they're looking into all of their available options. And, you know, your guess is as good as mine about whether Congress would be able to move on some authority to extend those waivers. But I think we'll have a much better sense by the end of April about what next year looks like. So that's as good as I got.
So why couldn't we put an automatic cap in our bill if we're going to change it at 18% or 20%? Once you reach that number of the schools that are out there that haven't put in universal meals, if school district called you, you just say, well, we've reached our cap and you're going to have to wait until next year.
My concern about that, so I can't tell a school district that they can't participate in this provision. What you're
there's no
suggesting
money.
that I have the control over is the money. And so I'm really concerned about how AOE would manage different types of reimbursements for different schools. I can tell you that if you were to go to a flat reimbursement per meal, the way that Faye had described earlier, our system can absolutely do that for everybody. That's not really a big deal. We're working with a new vendor now, and they've assured us that that's something that they can put into place. It would take us a little bit of time to get it up and running, but it's doing a flat per meal rate is not too difficult. But doing a different flat per meal rate, or one for some schools and one for none for another, is really pretty complicated. So I would discourage you from doing that.
Well, I think we're gonna call it a morning, and we've got other obligations in a few minutes. So we'll pick back up on this in the morning and go from there.
Can I just add, you currently don't have me down to testify tomorrow. It sounds like you're going to be discussing this more. Would you like me to be there?
I think for your own good, it would be good to have you there. No, if you have time, Rosie, we'd really appreciate you being with us, because we have quite a lot of confidence in your abilities, and it's very helpful. So if you could be with us, it would be great.
yeah, I can work with Linda and I'll make some time.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else from anyone? If not, thanks a lot, guys, and we'll pick